All right, we'll get started. Hello, my name is Mark Lee Wilson. I'm the Hydrogen Hub leader for the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the August installment of the Hub's webinar series. In just a moment, it'll be my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator, Malcolm Bruce from Edmonton Global. But before that, I just wanted to say a few brief words about today's webinar. Today, we'll be hearing from Pat Hufnagel-Smith, the author of the Transition Accelerator's report called Assessing the Workforce Required to Advance Canada's Hydrogen Economy. Hydrogen will be an important part of a future net zero Canadian economy, and the report lays a solid foundation to begin understanding the workforce that Canada will need for a hydrogen economy. And it provides a framework for follow-on work about how to build that workforce in a way that's efficient, strategic, and fair. Pat's report and the assessment tool that goes along with it provides perspective for all of Canada, but it made sense to host this webinar from the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub because we are leading the way for the rest of Canada, because we have all the ingredients here to do so. And we're the best place to launch a hydrogen economy. And really that's what the Hub is about. So let's be the proving ground for all of Canada. We should leverage what we have here and use the learnings to grow a hydrogen economy across all of Canada. So with that, I do want to thank our funders for the Transition Accelerator report, the Ivy Foundation. The work was wholly funded by them and could not have been performed otherwise. So now I will pass it on to CEO of Edmonton Global, Malcolm Bruce, who will be moderating today's webinar. Thank you, and take it away, Malcolm.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for inviting me to host today's conversation on advancing Canada's low-carbon hydrogen workforce. This webinar is part of the Edmonton Hydrogen Hub's webinar series on building a low-carbon hydrogen economy in the Edmonton region. These monthly conversations are meant to provide industry, government, and investors with knowledge and tools they need to take advantage of the Edmonton region's potential for low-cost, low-carbon hydrogen, and to contribute to the development of this new energy system. For information and updates about future webinars, join our mailing list by visiting Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub or erh2.ca, or follow us on Twitter or on LinkedIn. Today's topic is advancing Canada's hydrogen workforce. As Mark mentioned, we know that hydrogen will be a major part of Canada's net zero economy. The hydrogen industry already has skilled workforce, and developing a low carbon hydrogen economy will drive additional opportunities for high quality employment for people who are currently in higher emitting industries. But a well-launched functioning hydrogen workforce won't happen automatically. It will take planning on the part of government, industry, and academia. And first step towards that planning is undertaking what the hydrogen workforce would look like and what types of jobs will be needed and what kind of training will be required. To explore this issue, I am pleased to introduce Pat Hufnagel-Smith. She is a partner with Creative Links International. Pat has over 20 years of consulting experience, offering experience on assignments focused on social factors associated with energy development. She specializes in providing insights into the dynamics of Canada's labor market, emerging trends and occupations, and workforce requirements. Two areas Pat is most passionate about are the effective transition of skilled and experienced workers between industries and assisting clients to use labor market intelligence to develop evidence-based strategies that ensure communities share in the long-term benefits and value that accompanies the energy development. Pat is the author, as mentioned, of the Transition Accelerator report, assessing the workforce requirements are required to advance Canada's hydrogen economy. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to present your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them later in the webinar. Please use the Q&A box and not the chat box for these questions, as this will help me keep in one place where those questions are going to be. If somebody likes somebody else's question, please feel free to upvote it, and this will help us determine the order of questions will be addressed. Today's presentation will be available along with all the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub's past webinars at erh2.ca. and the presentation slides will be available to download there as well. Now, Pat, over to you, and I look forward to this dialogue. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Malcolm. And I am just going to share my screen and the slides and get rolling so that we can move into the conversation and questions. So what I thought I'd do really quickly in terms of sort of, kicking this off is to provide a little bit of context. Certainly Malcolm and Mark has already shared some information, but I think I want to applaud the Transition Accelerator for kind of taking a step back and I think saying to themselves, what's sort of a foundational piece of work that we can do in the workforce space as it's related to hydrogen that can really kind of offer a bit of a launch pad for other organizations that might also be working in the labor market space. And so that was really kind of how we came up to the key objective of being able to set the foundation by identifying what are those workforce requirements to advance the hydrogen economy. The idea being that others don't have to replicate that work. They can actually use this report to give them a bit of a head start in terms of other work that's being done. And I'm just really pleased to say that there is already other labor market work being done related to the hydrogen economy that you should pay attention to. Certainly, Edmonton Global is leading a consortium that's doing some additional work, as is Smart Prosperity and Petrol MI. So pleased to say that our objective is being met. So the project really delivered two key components. One is a report, which is the workforce required to advance Canada's hydrogen economy, and then also a workforce assessment tool. And I'm going to demonstrate this tool at the end of the presentation. Just to, part of the research really gathered a whole bunch of really solid information around what we need to do, who the workforce is and what needs to be done to advance the workforce. And so the tool is really hopefully a user-friendly document that can be used by a variety of audiences. A little bit about the approach that I took in doing this work. One, I started by leveraging the description of hydrogen supply and demand value chains that was developed by the Edmonton Hydrogen Hub and the Transition Accelerator. And this really kind of defines the supply, demand, and enabling value chains required to advance the low carbon economy. And then with a focus on existing or near-term technologies, or I should say the deployment of existing or near-term technologies, really set out to define the core occupational requirements for each of the value chains. And so went into fair detail and this is a lot of the detail that you're going to find in the tool. I think that, it was hard to kind of define a scope. And so really chose to focus on kind of existing and near-term technologies, but with the idea that this is, again, a bit of a launch pad for other work. And these documents and the workforce tool are living documents that as the low carbon economy evolves, so will this information. And so we don't see this as being an end all and be all, but actually an opportunity to evolve this information as the hydrogen economy evolves as well. And so important because of the rapid development that's happening in this space. I would say that what isn't in scope, but not that it isn't very important to how we advance the hydrogen economy is one, didn't do a lot of sort of looking at the engineering, procurement, and construction workforce that's going to be required to build related infrastructure. And the other piece that we didn't spend a lot of time on is looking at, the production of the feedstock for hydrogen production. So whether that be natural gas or renewable energy. Again, an opportunity for somebody to pick up the mantle and take a closer look at some of that, some of those important pieces of the workforce. So the report really provides a lot of detail around what the hydrogen workforce looks like. And of course, this is often a first question I get in terms of, people asking about what were some of the key findings associated with the report. And so, what I found, what the research indicated is that the core technical occupations that is required by the low carbon hydrogen industry is pretty similar to the core technical occupations that currently exist in Canada's energy industry. And so advancing our low carbon economy is really going to drive a lot of additional quality employment opportunities across these technical occupations. And the fact that there is such a variety of occupations, such a variety of pathways and qualifications required within the hydrogen industry really sets the stage for a variety of people choosing a variety of careers to be able to be involved in the hydrogen economy. And that's so important as we look at transitioning our energy system to a more sustainable energy system. Because I think if we look at some of the other energy sources or energy carriers that may be involved in a sustainable energy system, they don't offer the same kind of variety of opportunities. And so just very key in terms of thinking about what, the value of advancing hydrogen in particular. The other sort of core occupations that are required by the hydrogen industry are those occupations that really support the development of an ecosystem that's going to allow us to achieve our desired pace of change. There's no denying that to achieve net zero by 2050, we need to accelerate the deployment of hydrogen technology. And so these occupations really help to create the environment to see that pace of change also accelerate. So these occupations don't necessarily appear within the hydrogen industry in great amounts, but shortages of qualified talent across these occupations can cause bottlenecks to progression, and that in itself could also impede the progression of our hydrogen economy. So really important to kind of pay attention to these as well. The other potential challenge that's looming when we think about these kinds of occupations and them being needed for the hydrogen economy is that every other emerging or existing economy or industry is also looking to hire talent within these occupations. So just see the need and demand for some of these occupations growing significantly in the near term. So beyond sort of those technical skills that are needed by the hydrogen workforce is a whole set of employability skills, attitudes and behaviors that really are sort of cross-cutting across a number of the occupations within the hydrogen workforce. And this particular chart or graphic was developed by the Clean Resource Innovation Network, or CRIN. Some you may be familiar with it. And so it's not, these kinds of skills are not just for the hydrogen sector, but really for developing a innovation ecosystem across a number of sectors that again is going to help us advance and accelerate the work that needs to be done to achieve those net zero ambitions. And so I think what's really interesting is in doing this research is saw how these skills are really being demonstrated to advance low carbon hydrogen. And I see it being demonstrated by, you know, the organizations, government, and the companies that are coming together to collaborate and partner in accelerating technology sort of through that innovation and development life cycle. And so the concept here is that that's the new sort of way of doing business when we're looking to try and innovate and accelerate as quickly as we need to. And so really the workforce that is working within that innovation ecosystem and deploying those technologies also need these kinds of skills, really that kind of mimic that ability to collaborate, be agile, and so just a very refreshing and interesting sort of finding is to see companies and organizations that maybe in some spaces compete within the marketplace coming together to collaborate on innovation. A couple of other things that I wanted to share with you in terms of things that really sort of bubbled up in the research associated with this report is that there is tremendous opportunity to leverage existing experience found in today's labor market, you know, and thinking back to those occupations that make up the hydrogen workforce, you know, really what's required is how do we add on hydrogen specific knowledge and skills to strengthen those foundational technical skills that we already have in our labor market. The other thing that came out loud and clear in terms of you know, a key finding is that there's labor supply constraints that already exist that are going to impact the core hydrogen occupations that are required. And so we really need to focus on expanding the pool of qualified candidates. And, you know, some of the occupations that are top of mind are, you know, plant operators or power engineers, those with, you know, third-class power, third-class tickets or above. Instrumentation techs, which are just so key to, you know, the automation and control systems associated across the value chains. In fact, any of the trades are really are experiencing a lot of supply constraints right now. And the other one, truck drivers. I mean, the hydrogen supply chains really, you know, trucking hydrogen between supply and demand is just key. And there's a, you know, Canada-wide shortage of class 1 and class 3 truck drivers. So, you know, that's something we really have to pay attention to. That's even before we're seeing projects moving forward, you know, at the pace that we expect. And so, you know, we need to pay attention to that. In fact, I had companies indicate while I was doing the research that the widespread shortage of some of these core occupations is a greater talent risk than the lack of those hydrogen specific knowledge and skill sets. So need to keep that top of mind. Obviously, there's some emerging occupations that are hydrogen specific. A lot of those are related to, or emerging occupations, some of them are hydrogen specific, related to fuel cell technology in particular. And, Canada has been leading edge in terms of fuel cell research and development and engineering. We need to think about the occupations and skills required now to install, operate, and maintain that fuel cell technology. And we're lagging a little bit on that. And then also, again, emerging occupations related to building a sustainable energy ecosystem. And those are really, again, occupations with some of that deep technical, economic, and social expertise that help, companies kind of navigate their way through an emerging and sort of rapidly changing business, social, and regulatory environment. And leveraging off that, because those are emerging occupations, and some of other jurisdictions that have maybe been on this sustainability pathway a little bit longer than we have, there is a lack of homegrown talent with some of that experienced, advanced knowledge, whether it be, deep in hydrogen or some of those other sustainability occupations. And so certainly had companies say that they were looking to other jurisdictions that are maybe a little bit further ahead than Canada is, to bring in leadership around those particular business aspects. So what are we going to do about, advancing Canada's hydrogen workforce? And I would say, the original intention of this research was to identify a case study around kind of workforce development and transition that we could feature in the report. But what was interesting in terms of trying to find a case study is there's really no other jurisdiction, global jurisdiction that is really presents or offers a playbook in terms of how do we advance Canada's hydrogen workforce, or even sort of manage that workforce transition that is going to accompany transitioning to a more sustainable energy system. And so, in fact, I would say that, based on the research and with the development of this report, it puts Canada a little bit ahead of the game on the workforce, on the hydrogen workforce front, because there's other jurisdictions, certainly down in the US or even Australia that, or this kind of work is just in progress. So again, great foresight by the Transition Accelerator to do this work. So without sort of coming across a case study that would really offer some interesting insights to be featured in the report, I took a look at the Transition Accelerator's framework to really accelerate, again, hydrogen innovation, technologies, and the value chains. And there was a lot of opportunity to kind of take that framework that was established, again, for technology, and adapt it for advancing the hydrogen workforce. This framework, it really is about, pulling together, first creating an understanding of, what's the system, what's being transformed, bringing a number of stakeholders and voices together to co-develop and co-create solutions, implement pilot and other kinds of strategic actions that offer real-time learning and evidence as to what kind of solutions might be most impactful, and then really scaling those most impactful solutions. And I really found that this framework and what we want to do on the hydrogen workforce front aligns very, very well. And so the report, has adapted this framework to advancing the hydrogen workforce and offers some more specific actions that might be taken. So, as was identified in the introduction, Canada's net zero economy is only going to thrive if we have a well-functioning labor market. We know if we have labor shortages or a skills mismatch, it leads to cost overruns, competition for workers, escalating wages, and has a negative impact on project and deployment schedules. So we need to manage this labor market transition as, our energy systems transition, including hydrogen. But it doesn't happen automatically and without some strategic and collaboration across a number of stakeholders. So these again are opportunities that surfaced through the research that we could start taking advantage of now in order to, kind of advance labor market transition. Also identified the kinds of talent risks that need to be mitigated. And so, creating learning opportunities that add those hydrogen skills and knowledge to the existing expertise, collaborating across jurisdictions, especially those jurisdictions that are perhaps ahead of us, to understand whatever they're doing in this training and certification space as it relates to hydrogen. There's lots of opportunity to build a brand for hydrogen as an industry of choice to really attract that environmentally conscious talent pools. And then again, to come together to design and implement those pilot programs that in many ways are already being designed and implemented for the technology development side of things. Just thinking about what do we need to do to add a workforce component onto those pilot programs, and what can we learn by participating? What can we learn about what needs to be done on the workforce side of things that we can leverage? We need to build those deeper talent pools, really talked about that, and really expansion of those talent pools means we need to enhance diversity and inclusion of the labor market and need to continue to attract youth to the energy industry. And that way, but to do that, they need to understand what this sustainable energy industry across Canada looks like, including how hydrogen fits in. Think about those emerging hydrogen specific occupations so that we're ahead of the game as the deployment of those technologies fall into place. Come together as an industry to develop some endorsed standards for skills and knowledge. And finally, we really need to understand sort of the timing and magnitude of the hydrogen workforce supply demand so that we can, provide the evidence as to what occupations and when those occupations are going to be needed. And so that really is quantifying or doing, workforce projections, quantifying workforce projections. The other notion I want to set, and certainly the report talks about this as well, is when we're thinking about advancing the hydrogen workforce, the pace and magnitude of change matters. And so we really need to align workforce transition and development with the job creation associated with the development of the low carbon hydrogen value chains. We don't want to do something too fast. We don't want to be too slow, and we don't And we want to understand where is going to be the greatest growth, so that, again, the workforce strategies are addressing all those key elements of sort of that next phase of where we're headed in terms of understanding the workforce required for hydrogen, and really the quantification and timing. So in thinking about that, just, a couple of other sort of notions to set around pace, and aligning with the development of hydrogen technology, is we certainly see in the near term, we're going to, the deployment of hydrogen technology is marked by, terminology like retrofitting, converting existing systems, fuel switching or co-combustion, and blending. And so that really makes us think about the need to augment the skills and knowledge of the existing workforce that may be involved in all those kinds of activities like retrofitting or co-combustion or blending, so that they can work in both the hydrogen and traditional energy systems. But that gives them the pathway for being able to transition to full-time hydrogen roles at the same pace as the industry advances. I'll get asked questions like, well, how many hydrogen electricians are we going to need? And my answer is, well, none in the near term. Really what we're going to need are electricians that can work on hydrogen systems. And so that's the way we need to think about it, is augmenting that existing workforce so that those workers can also work in the hydrogen system. I think the other thing we have to think about in terms of workforce transition and development is to look at who's investing in hydrogen. And right now, a lot of the investment is coming from those that are involved in the traditional energy sector, whether that be oil and gas producers, pipelines, utility companies, or some of those end user sectors, industrial users or transportation. And so, their investment in hydrogen is really being driven by that need to decarbonize and advance sustainability. The beauty of this is that it offers an opportunity to offset job losses that might occur in those sectors as we transition our energy system, if we're ready to move some of those workers from the traditional energy systems into the hydrogen system. And so I think, and we're seeing this already, that a lot of those companies are undertaking training. They're looking at how do they reassign or redeploy their existing workforce as they, expand their portfolio into hydrogen, or start using hydrogen as an energy source or energy carrier. So that kind of wraps up sort of some of the key points or notions I wanted to leave you with, that, you'll find a lot more information in the report itself. But I did also want to take just a couple minutes to demonstrate the intention of the how the hydrogen workforce assessment tool is, how we anticipated it would be used. And so in the PowerPoint, when you receive it, you can follow this link, and it'll take you right to the page where you can find both the report and find the assessment tool. In order to demonstrate it, I have to shift gears here. So I'm just going to quickly stop sharing that and share the tool so I can quickly show you how this works. Looks very similar. So hopefully I've got the right one. So the idea behind the assessment tool was, as I said, as we were doing the research, there was lots and lots of information that came up, related to the key occupations, the qualifications required, what that occupation might be doing within the hydrogen economy, and then also some, what might be unique about that occupation in the hydrogen economy. And also, are there some specific talent opportunities or risks specifically for that core occupation? And so rather than creating, an appendix that would go on forever, created this assessment tool, which really is just a PDF with some navigation that allows a user to kind of hone in on the information that they want at any given time. So, and the other sort of vision associated with this tool was that it developed so that it could support, the development of hydrogen hubs. As you probably know, the hydrogen hub approach to, development is for a region to look at, what is its supply demand strengths? What's the opportunity to scale, leverage those strengths and scale? And so again, the same concept, while assessing, the opportunities to scale, supply and demand technologies, this is to really sort of assess the workforce requirements associated with those specific supply and demand technologies, and really help a hydrogen hub manage its workforce requirements. So, manage that labor market growth, manage, the potential for workforce transition so that, the talent risks don't risk a project or the, ongoing development of a hub. So, really quickly show you that while the thought was that this tool and the report will be complementary, the tool does have the capability to kind of be a standalone document as well, because we certainly have included enough information to give some context and background. So introduces, the low carbon hydrogen economy in Canada, how we're going to develop it, what the hub approach is, and again, looking at the how we define or how we categorize those key value chains that are required to establish a low carbon hydrogen economy. And then moving into the navigation hub for identifying the workforce requirements by each of the hydrogen value chains. So this is slide 9 in the tool, and as you'll see, the requirements have been categorized based on the different value chains of production, storage, upgrading, transportation, expanding existing and creating new markets for low carbon hydrogen, manufacturing, which is a key and critical enabling tool for the advancement of our hydrogen economy, and then roles that are going to be common across the value chain. And so I'll just simply demonstrate what happens when you click one of these links. And let's go to, say, PEM electrolysis as a low carbon hydrogen production. It gives you a bit of an overview of this particular technology, an overview of the core occupations required for this technology, and then goes into the details related to this core occupation. So what is the core occupation? What are some of those typical qualifications at a minimum level? How is that occupation? What kinds of activities within this particular technology? What kind of activities will that occupation be involved in? Are there some unique requirements for hydrogen in particular? And are there any potential talent risks or opportunities associated with that core occupation? So I do hope that, you find the tool of value. If you have any questions or, like I said, these are living documents. Anything you think could be an upgrade to anything that I've shared with you in terms of the tool, please don't hesitate to get a hold of me, and happy to have a conversation.
Thank you, Pat. That was very thorough and very comprehensive, and there's a lot to unpack there. So I really appreciate the opportunity. So just as a reminder for everybody on the webinar, if you wish to ask a question and answer, please just put it into the question and answer chat box, or into the box, question and answer box, not the chat box, and the question and answer box, and I'll get to them. But first, I must admit, I've now been struck by a couple of themes that you have gone through, Pat. So if okay, I'm gonna kick off the questioning if that's all right with everybody, and then I'll get to the Q&A here shortly. So the first question I have for you, Pat, is you spoke about a workforce ecosystem with two essential component parts. One is that core skills, but also all those enabling elements, those other things that you talked about. Can you expand a little bit on those enabling or supporting elements of the ecosystem and how they help create and drive ecosystem outcomes?
You bet. I mean, so really, these are occupations that play a key role in ensuring Canada has the right components, pieces in place to instill confidence and some certainty that we can actually achieve the advancement of a hydrogen economy, and that it is part of that pathway to net zero by 2050. And so when I talk about confidence or certainty, I mean, that's across a number of stakeholders. That's public confidence, that's confidence by investors that, that we can do what we're going to say we're going to do. And so those are occupations that are going to they're going to develop market pull interest in, our hydrogen by market pull or market demand, creating that kind of market demand, instilling confidence across the public that hydrogen is safe and it is going to help us achieve those goals related to a more sustainable energy system, and that we also have the important partnerships in place that we need, especially here in Canada, to progress energy projects anymore. And so that's certainly, confidence at a community level and partnerships with our, with our Indigenous peoples and communities.
Pat, I so agree with you on that confidence piece. I think, one of the things that we who are out in market all the time here is this concern from international investors about our ability to be able to deliver on projects. So I think that certainty and confidence are two key takeaways for me. So thank you for that. The next question I had, Pat, was around your key findings. You note that there are a few key areas that we need to focus on. Can you provide some insight on how we could implement strategies or accelerate existing programs or activity, not only close some of the identified gaps, but actually to overcome them if possible?
Yeah, I think that's, I think even in the slide sort of talked about, there's those opportunities to leverage, or there's certainly some talent opportunities that we can leverage. And there is some, risks that aren't just down the road, but actually are today that we need to develop. And I'm going to go back to that framework around advancing the hydrogen workforce, because, that first step is to create some understanding. That second step is so critical in terms of creating the strategies and tactics for addressing those risks. And that's that coming together to co-develop and co-create what the solutions are. And I think that, acceleration comes with bringing, the voices of multiple stakeholders together so that we can really leverage the expertise that we might have in addressing talent solutions or addressing talent challenges, and that we're working down the same path in order to do that. And so I would say that co-development and co-creation is really a critical next step in terms of advancing our hydrogen workforce.
Yeah, collaboration and communication. I think those are always going to be two of the forefront of all successful outcomes. So thank you for that sharing. So if I may ask one last question before I get to the Q&As, because they're starting to populate now. So thank you to the audience for continuing to look at Q&As for Pat, because I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them. You speak to a well-managed hydrogen labor market to help mitigate risks. Can you speak a little bit more to your thoughts on how we may be able to achieve this, given some of the uncertainty currently where we are in the development of this hydrogen opportunity, as well as many ongoing projects that are, either in the ideation phase or not quite haven't come to fruition?
Yeah, and I would say, that was a challenge even in terms of doing this research. It's a space that is rapidly evolving and changing, and so for me, it really harkens back to having a good understanding of what's near term, what's existing, and what's near term from a deployment perspective. And so for me, that is, really honing in on what are some indicators we can use that tell us what's existing or near term. And so are there projects that are being announced? Are there some key drivers like regulations or key incentive programs that gives us, again, back some idea or confidence that certain sort of technologies are going to be deployed or certain kinds of projects are going to move forward? And it's, in some ways, you don't want to pick winners and losers, but some of that hydrogen technology that is, earlier on in the innovation or development phase, those aren't the technologies that we want to focus our workforce development on, because we want to pace the change so that workers are ready when the jobs are. Not too early, not too late, because that goes back to, that's not a well-managed labor market. That means we end up with skills mismatches and cost overruns and tighten labor markets, and that's what we're trying to avoid. And so it wasn't possible sort of in the timeline that we had to, kind of quantify that pace and magnitude of change that we're going to see within the hydrogen workforce within this project. But I'm really pleased to say that, work that's being led by Edmonton Global and again by Petra LMI is working on creating that quantified workforce projections, and that's going to be a huge help in terms of providing evidence as to how we can manage this transition.
So that's a perfect segue into a number of questions that we're getting in the Q&A session. It's really about that timing issue. So first, one of the questions is around, how do we get the credentialing that's going to be necessary to qualify or upskill or reskill in our post-secondary institutions, as a first question? And then I'll ask a second one. So how quickly can we move with the PSIs to be able to develop the programs that you're envisioning here?
Yeah, so I think, again, leveraging that key finding that there's tremendous opportunity to leverage the technical skills that we already have. So I think it's not, so we're not having to, at least initially, create a whole bunch of 2-year diploma or 4-year degree programs. We need to continue to build a talent pool that are, within those existing diploma and degree programs. But a lot of what I believe we're looking at in terms of bringing the workforce along is micro-credentials. So how do we take an engineer that's worked in the natural gas industry? What kinds of additional knowledge and skills do they need to be able to work in the hydrogen industry? They've got those technical foundational technical skills around, compression and, how gases operate and that kind of stuff. What do they need to know to specifically work in the hydrogen industry? And that's a bolt-on skill or knowledge that really is sort of the concept behind micro-credentials, that to my understanding can be more easily developed and deployed than the longer time frame that's needed for degree and diploma programs. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have to think about that, but I think in the short term, it's some of that micro-credentialing, it's maybe boot camps, it's what's sort of the intense learning opportunities that can we develop, to qualify existing technical occupations to work in hydrogen. And I think the other, so you talk about the PSIs, and I think what's really interesting there as well is I think it's a bit of a opportunity for our continuing ed departments within PSIs, because they're the ones that have lots of experience and expertise in developing those add-on kinds of short-term courses, learning opportunities. And so I really believe that that's where a lot of, sort of the near-term course development needs to happen. But I do think I do think one of the things that we perhaps need to do better across our PSIs is collaboration. I think that we still see institutions doing their own thing. And I understand, there's that competitive environment. So I think we have to think about how do we incent institutions and jurisdictions to collaborate on developing, a set of micro-credentials or short-term learning opportunities that has industry's endorsement, as opposed to everybody trying to do their own thing.
So I'm always conscious that sometimes we have people online that may not be from Canada. So PSIs, for those that don't know, is post-secondary institutions, so colleges and universities. I know I use the term, so I'm always at fault, so please forgive me. But to sort of follow on that, I guess one of the questions that is in the chat talks about some of the, as you noted in your thoughts around some of the areas that we already have gaps, is the shortage of skilled labor forces, just to manage our current energy programs now. So is there other strategies we could use to help, not only help fill gaps today, but also, as you say, plan for tomorrow? And I think about some of the work that's being done in the UK or the US or in individual businesses around competency-based testing. So it's not credentialing, it's more of, if you can do it, then you get signed off and accredited for doing. Is that a strategy that could maybe help as well?
Yeah, and I think it aligns very well with leveraging what we already have in the existing workforce. And I think, the thing about competency testing is that it can be individualized, because when we talk about workforce transition and people perhaps moving between industries, it is very individual, because every individual brings a whole variety of experiences and skill sets to the table. And so it's not like somebody who's just starting out in their training or career path where, sort of everybody's coming into a program with a blank slate, that competency testing really helps to individualize what that individual needs to do to transition based on all the experience and skill sets that they bring to the table. So, so I think that's huge. But I think the other thing, is, and, didn't do a lot of this work necessarily with the hydrogen project, but certainly with other work that I'm doing, is that we hear that this is not only, young people that are trying to make career decisions, but even people that are already working in the industry, that there's so much uncertainty and misconceptions around what's happening to Canada's energy system, and what does that transition to a more sustainable energy system look like? And so it's just as, we need to provide some certainty, some understanding and certainty and confidence to investors to invest in our energy system. You need to do the same thing with our talent pools, provide them more understanding and education around, what is happening around with our energy system, so that they can, and what they need to do to build a resilient career. That it is possible to have a resilient career in the energy sector. I think that, that's been a real detractor in terms of attracting talent, and that being part of hydrogen, even being part of oil and gas and some of the technologies that are being deployed there, is part of the solution towards net zero by 2020. Where everybody's focused on decarbonization, and you can be part of the energy system and be part of the solution too.
So it's a good segue to the last question I think we have time for before we wrap up. Is part of your branding exercise is making sure we're starting to encourage people to think about the energy system or the energy sector as a possible career choice. What's your thoughts about introducing some kind of introductory program at the high school level?
I think that's, I think high school, maybe even earlier, in terms of, sort of balanced perspective on, what the challenges are from an environmental perspective, and what's a realistic sort of pathway to get there. And so, I think, because part of the challenge is that by high school, if you're not taking some of the right courses in high school, then that creates issues for you going into post-secondary education, because you don't have the right, entry-level requirements. And so really, where do we start sort of influencing I'm going to get in trouble for saying influencing, but where do we start giving students the information they need to make decisions going into high school that will give them, the options that they might need in making those choices around where they go from a post-secondary perspective?
With that, we'll conclude the webinar. Thank you very much to everybody attending. And of course, a special thanks to Pat for that most informative presentation and a very engaging question and answer period. So thank you, Pat, for that. The recording of this webinar will be available at the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub YouTube channel by tomorrow. Be sure to join us next month in September webinar towards net zero emission and HD trucks in Alberta towards meeting Canada's climate change commitments, which will be a joint presentation with the Alberta Motor Transportation Association, Alberta Zero Emissions Truck Electrification Collaboration, the Transition Accelerator, and the Canadian Energy Systems Analyst Research Initiative at the University of Calgary. Stay tuned and stay in the loop for future webinar topics by joining our mailing list at erh2.ca and follow us again on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you again, everybody, and have a great day.